Hello, everybody. Welcome to our March School Medicaid Lunchinar. Today is making things easier for your service providers. I'm Bob Bundy, your presenter for today's session. Here's my contact information while I cover a couple of our normal Lunchinar ground rules. First, all of our Lunchinars are targeted at 30 minutes. Today we should be right around 30 minutes, so that would be good. We don't talk about anything state specific. We all know that school Medicaid rules are different state by state. So for the Lunchinars, we try and pick topics and content that are broad enough to appeal to everybody from around the country without diving into the details of every rule in every state. Almost all of you know that we give at least one Lunchinar per month during the school year. We have two more after this Lunchinar, all designed to present information on a single topic we think folks in school Medicaid should know about. So if you're interested in the future Lunchinars, go out to the website, go to the events tab, read the description and register for ones you're interested in, just like you registered for today's. So today I have a couple of different learning objectives for this session. First, I'm going to discuss some of the obstacles that service providers face in dealing with the school Medicaid program. Some of these are obstacles that I have seen firsthand over and over and over. Others are ones that have been relayed to me by different people around the country. And second, I'll give you an idea of some strategies or approaches that your school district might be able to offer that assist those providers in removing or at least maybe minimizing some of those obstacles. Now, in today's session, I am talking mostly to school districts or LEAs, if that's the term you use. Or if you're here in Arizona, they use the term PEA. But that's usually who I'm talking to today. I have a couple of messages directed at billing companies and software companies, and I'll be very deliberate in pointing out when I'm talking about that. Now, today I am not recommending to school districts that you coddle your service providers. I don't want you going to extraordinary lengths to do all their work for them. They have a responsibility, I know, to document services that they deliver, and that kind of stuff turns into Medicaid-supported documentation. What I am talking about today are ways that maybe you can make their lives a little bit easier in their participation in school Medicaid, because obviously if they're not documenting everything they should or they're not documenting it the correct way, you're not really maximizing your compliance and you're probably not maximizing your program revenue. So let me start off by talking about the areas that I have seen that cause trouble for service providers in dealing with school Medicaid. And some of you on the call or on the Lunchinar may be familiar with all of these things. And some of these may be things you haven't really considered before. First is the way that providers work, their workload and their work style. You know, today I know it is not unusual to find a speech therapist, for example, who might have 70 or 80 kids on her caseload. Today, she might have seen 19 kids in a combination of group and individual sessions, and she's got to document services for all of those kids as far as the Medicaid billing, right? So the workload is high on a lot of service providers. And where are they going to find the time to do all the things they need to do related to school Medicaid? Next one is sort of the itinerant nature of their work. It's not unusual for service providers to move building to building during the day within a school district, or to move between school district and school district if they're contract workers for different school districts. And so we have a provider who has 19 kids that she saw today, and she was in her car 3 different times going back and forth from building to building. And there's something else. Now, this is not really common, but it's not that unusual. At the end of the day, at 3:15, when your school is out, we have a provider who actually goes to a clinic setting and provides services at that clinic. Clinic has absolutely nothing to do with school Medicaid, but it's more time that they have to spend doing real work. And again, they had to jump in their car at 3:15 to get to that clinic. They didn't have time to document services for all 19 kids for today. That's just a fact of the way they work. They have crazy days. They have lots of demands on their time, and Medicaid billing, or Medicaid documentation, which is how a lot of service providers think of this, is probably pretty low on their priority list. Now, how do service providers document their service? Well, maybe they still do it on paper. This is getting less and less common. 5 years ago, when I would be talking to a school district, it might be 50-50. 50% of their providers might actually still be documenting things on paper, and 50% of them would be online. Today, the majority of school districts I work with are using some sort of online tool to document their services. But here's the deal. Think about that provider we talked about. She had 19 kids that she saw today, session after session, get in her car, jump across town to that next building and jump back to this other building. Where did she find a computer to document her services? Assuming she's not using paper, where did she find that computer? Okay, maybe she got lucky and she found it in a computer lab, but maybe she couldn't. Maybe all the computer labs were full. Maybe she couldn't find a computer at all and she just took some notes, basic notes on Post-it notes, and she's going to document them later, maybe at lunchtime or tonight, maybe at the end of the week, or maybe she'll just forget about today. Not because she's a bad person or she doesn't want to, just things like that slip through the cracks, right? Think also about the way the other tools that our providers have. A high percentage, well, it's not even just a high percentage of providers, just a high percentage of society has mobile devices, whether they're smartphones or tablets. And that can actually give them access to the documentation tools, even when they have like 2 or 3 minutes between a session. Unfortunately, a lot of the software products that they have to work with to document their services were built 10 years ago or 15 years ago, were not built for mobile devices. And you can tell when a provider is using an application like that because they're swiping up and down and they're swiping left and right and they're clicking and pointing and swearing. And you just know that that application, yes, they can get to it, but it's just a royal pain to try and make that application work on this smartphone because it wasn't built for that. And last one is a lot of you I know live in states that use a cost reconciliation, cost reimbursement methodology. And one of the components that's commonly used in the cost reimbursement is the random moment time study. And the random moment time study very commonly is administered through email, which means that your providers on a very regular basis have to check their email to see if they got a random moment. And I know that there are tons of providers out there that before the random moment time study came along, they never even had email accounts there at the school district. They were doing whatever they did, and they turned in their documentation, their paperwork, but they didn't even have email accounts. Today they do. Today they have to specifically log in every day, just on the off chance that they got a random moment that they need to respond to. And we all know they may not get a random moment for the entire school year. So they log on, they look at their inbox, they take the time to do this, and there's nothing there for them to read. So the nature of the provider's work, their workload, and their work style can be a huge obstacle for them when they're doing their documentation for school Medicaid. Now I'm going to turn to kind of the mental aspect, the motivational or morale aspect of this. Why do service providers do what they do? Well, they do it because of the same reason a lot of educators do what they do. They love kids, right? They love helping kids achieve things. And when there are obstacles in front of kids and service providers or educators can help those kids meet and overcome those obstacles, I mean, that's what they live for. And we all know that. Unfortunately, Medicaid billing, and I'm using kind of the air quotes there, Medicaid billing is not dealing with kids as far as the service provider is concerned. A lot of times service providers see Medicaid billing or the documentation for Medicaid billing as an obstacle to them. Why? Well, I classify these things in two kind of big general buckets. And the first bucket is a lot of times it's the way that this work is presented to them. Let me give you an example of that in just a minute. The second bucket is it's because school Medicaid is a black box to them. They have no concept of what's going on. They know that they have to fill out this paperwork or they have to go to this screen, but they have no visibility to anything else. It's a complete black box. And we all know, well, maybe we don't all know, I just learned that adults really, when they learn new things, they really need to understand the application of what they just learned. Unlike a second grader who just learned math, he's not going to walk, or he just learned addition, is not going to walk out of math class and try and figure out what he's going to do in his future life with math. But you start teaching an adult something, they want to know how it's going to apply to them. A lot of service providers have no clue how the school Medicaid program applies to them or their kids, and that can be a huge demotivator for them. Okay, so a couple different examples that I have here. A few years ago, I was giving a training class to a school district. I was going to teach their providers how to use a documentation tool. Probably 40 people in the room. At the beginning of the class, I'm standing up in front and I'm being introduced by somebody who says, this is Bob, and Bob's going to teach you this, and we're going to be here for a couple of hours. And then, and this is a direct quote, she says to the providers, we're going to do this because starting this school year, you are all going to start billing Medicaid. And immediately you kind of see the barriers go up, kind of the squinty eyes. I can just imagine what's going through somebody's head. You know, I've got 65 kids on my caseload. I had to move heaven and earth to get here for this training class. I am not going to be billing Medicaid. So I actually had to reset their expectations and say to them, I'm here to give you guys training on this documentation tool that's going to help you manage your caseload. It's going to help you manage your calendar. It's going to make your documentation a whole lot easier. It's going to help you basically manage your workflow during the day. And the people in the back office are going to use some of the information you put in to bill Medicaid, but you guys are not going to bill Medicaid. I'm going to show you how to make your life easier. Now, I have seen that same presentation to service providers all around the country. Hey team, we're here because you're going to bill Medicaid starting right now. And, you know, they've got a million things that they're doing and the barriers just go up. Now, a couple of other examples. In Colorado, there's a state law that says all money coming from the school Medicaid program goes back to school health or student health programs, and it must be spent on student health programs. So every service provider in Colorado knows that when they're, you know, electronically signing their service logs or they're filling out their session notes or something like that, they know that they're doing that because that's helping bring more money back to the kids that they're serving deliberately. It's not going to an artificial turf football field or new microscopes in the science lab or something like that. And that is a real positive motivator for them. Now, that is very unusual that there's an actual state law like that. Most service providers around the country don't know what's going on in the program. Sometimes they don't know how much money is generated, and they typically don't know where it's going. Again, huge demotivator. I'm just filling out all this stuff and I'm doing all this stuff because the district tells me to. Last one is tools. And I mentioned this a little bit ago. Today, when I talk to school districts, most of them are using software online to document their services. Where does that software come from? Well, most of it around the country comes from their billing company. I think billing companies provide a very valuable service. I think they do really good work. And one of the tools typically that billing companies provide is a software documentation tool. But they didn't start off as software companies. They kind of evolved into it. Some of them have larger programming staffs than other ones who might have just one or two programmers, right? My opinion, and I've seen lots of different software systems for providers to document their services. I've seen lots of them. My opinion, the usability for them across the board is typically pretty low. Now, the internet that we know today, the World Wide Web, really took off in 1995. That's really when it blew the doors out and everybody started getting onto the internet. Software applications started to come around on the internet about 2003, 2004, somewhere in there, the middle of the first decade of this century. And some of the software that service providers use today to document their services was built in 2005 or 2006, 14 years ago, 15 years ago, something like that. And the usability is a lot is really lacking. And so that's what I said, when you see a service provider trying to make an application which was written for the desktop work on their phone or a tablet, you see real frustration. This is where service providers look at this tool as more of an obstacle than anything it is to help them. I wish I could just write it down, and I don't know how many times I've heard a service provider say this. I wish I could just write it down and turn it in, because that's a whole lot easier than this software system I have to use. So to summarize the issues, there's the nature of the work that service providers perform. It just doesn't mesh well with the documentation requirements that go along with school Medicaid. But it is what it is, right? There's the motivational aspect that the service providers are in the dark, in my opinion, as far as having a real clear understanding of why they're doing what they're doing. And I think they're demoralized when they don't see a direct benefit to the kids that they serve. And last, that the tools that were really designed to help them were designed so long ago and haven't kept up. And again, the tools become almost as big of a barrier as anything else for these service providers. So what are some of the things you can do as a school district to address these? These are some ideas that I have seen in practice. There's some ideas that I have had discussions with. Maybe I haven't been in the school district, but these people present them to me and tell me how they're addressing some of these issues that we've just talked about. Well, I've talked about and you guys have listened to. First one I have is office hours. When I was in college, I could be in a class with 400 kids, and I need to talk to the professor for more than just a quick question. So every professor had published office hours. Sometime during the week, they give the start date or the start time and the end time. When they're in their office, you can drop by, or you can make an appointment or something like that and stop in. I've seen a couple of different school districts do this, and I'm just giving you an example of how they implement it. Maybe on Tuesday from 9 to 10:15, and again on Thursday from 2 to 3:45. We have one of the Medicaid coordinators who understands the Medicaid program inside and out. They work with it every day, and they understand the software package that we use. And they find a computer lab or a room that has computers in it, and they publish the office hours. And service providers can stop in. They can stop in and ask questions. They can stop in and access a computer, show somebody what they're trying to do, and get some guidance on that kind of stuff. I talked to one service provider who basically does her documentation online during the week, but then stops in to the office hours, I guess I'll call it, when she wants to review all of her sessions and apply her electronic signature. Because in that system, when they apply their electronic signature, they're done. No more changes. So she just does it in that setting because she's comfortable. If she sees anything that's a question, she can call somebody over and ask, and she's there for maybe 10 minutes and walks out. I talked to another service provider who said to me, I have received training. We did a 2 or 3 hour training to use the software. But I've been coming to office hours since school started, and I'm getting really comfortable now. There's hardly anything I have to ask about, but I feel comfortable in this setting. Probably a couple weeks from now, I won't be coming to office hours unless I have a specific question. But right now, it feels really good to be here and just have that affirmation. So I pass that along because that's a subject, or that's an approach I have seen work in a school district. And I know if you're in a great big huge school district and you have 100 schools out there, it's probably tough to have office hours enough during the week to cover all your service providers. But there may be ways that you can look at that approach and figure out a way for it to work in your school system. The next one I internally call Medicaid 101. And again, remember, I talked about the fact that a lot of service providers have no idea what's going on inside of school Medicaid. And it's not that that the school district is intentionally not telling them. They just never get to it. They spend so much time talking about, well, document this way and use the software this way, that they never really get to that why. Why am I doing it? Or what's going on behind the scenes? So one school district that I talked to, on a monthly basis, when they would have a staff meeting, so, maybe all the speech therapists get together once a month for a 1 hour staff meeting or something like that. They would take the first 5 to 15 minutes, depending on the subject, and they would offer a little mini class to everybody in the room about some component of school Medicaid. And a couple of examples are things like parental consent. There are definitely people in your school system who know all the ins and outs of parental consent, and they know exactly how to speak to parents about parental consent. But service providers probably get hit up with questions from parents too, maybe on conference nights or conference afternoons or parent-teacher meetings kind of stuff. And they're talking with the OT and they're asking about what's going on with their child, but they just got the notice, the annual notice in the mail, and they hit the OT up with some kind of question about parental consent. And the OT it's just not something that she's really comfortable with because she's never really been told what it covers. And again, in these little mini lessons, I don't mean that they go into the ins and outs of everything with parental consent, but they give them the broad overview, why we have to do it, what's required at a general level, and these are some of the questions that parents ask. So again, they can get some visibility into this. A couple of other areas, there's the random moment time study, not the detail of how you reply to this email, but what is the random moment time study? Why do we have to do this at all? How does it fit into school Medicaid? FERPA and HIPAA, a lot of service providers have come from a clinical setting at one point in their career. And over in the clinical setting, HIPAA is the law, right? They know HIPAA inside and out, especially how it matters to what they're doing on a daily basis. They come into the school setting, and now we have FERPA, and a lot of people kind of mix up HIPAA and FERPA, or they think they cover the same stuff, or they think they overlap, or they think they don't touch at all, and they don't have that overview. And again, not going into the details of all the requirements of HIPAA or FERPA, but just talking about how the two of them interact here in our school setting, right? In the school Medicaid world. So providing that kind of basic information to the service providers so they get some visibility. Now they start to understand a little bit some of the moving parts in the school Medicaid program, and they feel better about what they're doing. And one of the best ways to make them feel better is to actually publish the results. And I've seen this in the corporate world for years and years. Lots of companies publish their results on a weekly or monthly or quarterly basis, not just their financial results, but their activities. It's not unusual in a sales department for the sales manager to publish the number of contracts that they closed or the number of new customers that they have or something like that. Over here in the school Medicaid world, I don't see a lot of that going on about school Medicaid. Yes, the state of Colorado has that state law that says all the money has to go back to student health programs. So they feel good about that. They may not know the details, but they know that everything they're doing is going back to student health. In most states, they don't have that kind of a law. And so in a lot of school districts, they don't publish the results. Imagine how excited providers would be if you stood up and said, last month the school Medicaid program returned $53,000 to our school district, and we spent the money on this equipment, on this after school program, on these reading materials for these kids that you guys are serving. I think that's a huge morale booster for anybody who's involved in school Medicaid. It's probably a good morale booster for everybody in the school district, but especially the service providers, so they can see, oh, if I don't sign that page, or if I don't document that service fully, or if I forget an entire day's worth of sessions just because life kind of jumped in, that's going to have an impact. That's going to have a real big impact. Okay? I call this taking care of the providers. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I don't expect school districts to coddle their providers, but there are some things that you can probably do to assist them in making their lives easier for the school Medicaid program. So the first one, I've seen this in action at a couple different school districts. I'm a service provider. Today it's Thursday, it's 10:30, and I get a phone call. And it's Linda from the main office, and she says, Bob, did you hold that group speech discussion yesterday at Adams Elementary at 2 o'clock? And I say, well, yes, I did. And she says, good. I thought you might have, but it's not documented in the system. Could you take a minute? Maybe you're going to do it at lunchtime, or maybe you're going to do it this afternoon, but could you take a minute and document that? I really would appreciate it. I just don't want it to fall through the cracks. Generally speaking, my experience is that service providers love this kind of reminder. They don't feel like it's Big Brother looking over their shoulder. It's more like the school district is looking after the service provider. So that's a really good example. Another one is a notice of upcoming activities. So here in Arizona, where I live, several years ago, the state added personal care services to the school Medicaid program. Here in Arizona, they call it health aid services. And what that meant was that all of a sudden, all these personal care providers or health aides are going to start participating in the school Medicaid program. Well, here in Arizona, they have a random moment time study that's handled through email. None of those providers had email accounts anywhere across the state. It took a couple of years to get those providers used to logging in, looking at the email, seeing if they got a random moment that they need to reply to, making sure they do that on a regular basis. Well, here's the deal. In most states, there's somebody at sort of an administrative main office level who can look at the school district and see who has gotten some random moments in the last day. And so it would be great if I don't need to log on to my email every single day just to see that I don't have a random moment. But if Linda called me and said, Bob, you got a random moment this morning, it has to be replied to by 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Could you make sure you go out to check your email when you have a break? Again, that's somebody taking care of me. And yes, it takes a little bit of work to do that, but the consequences of a lot of providers missing those moments and not replying, of course, is a big deal. Another example of this is license updates. Kind of depends on the state, kind of depends on the type of license, the type of provider, the type of certification. Sometimes the provider is responsible for renewing certain things, and sometimes it's the school district that's responsible for renewing certain things. School districts who are really on top of their school Medicaid program have a complete list, not just of the things they're supposed to take care of, but of the things the providers are supposed to take care of. And again, it would be really great if I got a phone call that said, Bob, I see that your first aid certification is set to expire next month. Is there anything I can do to help you? Can I get the packet printed off for you? Are there signatures that you need to get? Do you need to get a history of your work or something like that? Anything I can do to help you with that? That's a huge benefit to the service providers who know that they have to renew this license or they have to pull together a list of all their continuing education or that kind of stuff. It's a huge benefit to have the school district looking out for them. Even if the provider's still going to do it themselves, having that reminder from the main office is a big deal, a big deal. Last, the tools. And I mentioned this a few minutes ago, talking about the software tools. Several years ago, many of you know I was the president of a school Medicaid billing company. We had a software product that providers used to document services, and it had lots and lots of nifty features. But we recognized that it really wasn't the most usable. It took them too many clicks and too many waits for the page to refresh to document their services. So we actually took an entire year and redid the provider documentation section of that so that they could get in and on average document a service in 20 to 30 seconds. At the same time, we spent the time and the investment to build a mobile app that was not just the regular website running on a browser on the phone. It was a real mobile app that again was maximized for, targeted to maximize the usability of the application for the provider. So that, again, they could get in and wouldn't have to scroll and flip back and forth and all that kind of stuff, but really focused on getting them in and out in 20 or 30 seconds to document a service session. Here's my general rule of thumb. If you're a school district and a service provider spends 15 minutes providing a service, 15-minute session, and they have to spend 4 or 5 or more minutes documenting that session, you probably need to talk to your software company. And if that software came from your billing company, you need to talk to them. If it came from someplace else, talk to them too, because the usability is pretty low on something like that. And so a word to billing companies out there who've developed software for their school districts. I know that you probably didn't start off life as a software company, but you've taken on that responsibility as you've built and developed and deployed tools out to your customers. I know typically a lot of school Medicaid billing companies are really small, and they might have one programmer or 3 or 5 programmers, typically small staff, but you really need to invest in improving the user experience for your customers. Again, if your software was written 10 years ago or 15 years ago, it was written for a desktop with a mouse and lots of clicks and lots of page up and page down and all that kind of stuff. You got the mouse wheel, makes things easy. It doesn't translate well to the phone or to a tablet, and that causes a lot of pain for service providers. Even if the software has all the features in it that they need, if it takes them 5 minutes to get to it, that's a problem. So those are some ideas that I pass along that, again, have been passed along to me or ones that I have seen. Here's my contact information again. Anybody has something you want to talk about, today's topic or anything related to school Medicaid, drop me an email or give me a call. You guys take care, and we'll talk to you soon.